There is a particular kind of British car that the 1950s and 60s produced, which the rest of the world has never been entirely able to replicate or to forget. It was not the most sophisticated machine available. It was not the quickest, not by the absolute measure that the racing fraternity applied. It was not luxurious in any sense that a continental grand tourer would have recognized. What it was, in the best examples of the type, was an experience, a specific, tactile, slightly demanding conversation between a driver and a road, conducted at speeds that required attention and rewarded commitment, in a body that sat close enough to the tarmac that you felt the road thinking about you as much as you were thinking about it. The Austin-Heeley 3000 was one of the finest expressions of that type that Britain ever produced. It was a big-engined, long-bonneted, open two-seater that wore its purpose on the outside without apology or decoration. It was also, which surprises, people who encounter it first as a concours object rather than as a working car, a serious competition machine, one that won the RAC Rally of Great Britain outright 3 times in its production life, and that finished at the front of some of the most demanding long-distance events that international motorsport mounted in the years between 1959 and 1967. That combination of the open road car that was also a genuine rally winner, the gentleman's roadster that could and did humiliate purpose-built competition machines on gravel stages in the dark, is the thing about the Austin-Heeley 3000 that deserves a proper examination. Because the two sides of the car's character were not in contradiction, they came from the same place, and understanding where that place was tells you something specific about what Britain's motor industry was capable of in its last great confident era. There is also a detail about the car's final years, a decision made under pressure from regulations and from a market that was changing faster than anyone had anticipated, that casts the whole story in a particular light. We will get there. Donald Healey, BMC, and how the Big Healey came to exist. The Austin-Heeley story begins, as several of the best British sports car stories do, with a man who cared about cars in the way that made other people's caution about what was commercially sensible feel slightly beside the point. Donald Healey was a Cornishman, a development engineer, a rally driver who had won the Monte Carlo Rally in 1931, and a businessman with a particular understanding of what a sports car needed to be to sell. By the late 1940s, he had established the Donald Healey Motor Company in Warwick, building small-volume performance cars using proprietary components. The turn toward mass production came at the 1952 Earl's Court Motor Show. Healey arrived with a new Roadster, styled by his son Jeff, carrying proportions that made most other cars on the stand look uncertain about their own intentions. Leonard Lord, the chairman of the British Motor Corporation, saw it, understood immediately what it could do for BMC's sports car offering, and made a proposal before the show closed. The result, announced the same weekend, was the Austin-Heeley, a collaboration that would produce 3 distinct model lines over the following 15 years, of which the 3000 was the ultimate expression. The original Healey 100 used the Austin A90's 2,660 cubic centimeters 4-cylinder engine and sold well enough to confirm the formula. The 6-cylinder engine arrived with the Austin-Heeley 106 in 1956, using BMC's C-Series 2,639 cubic centimeters unit. The transition to the 2,912 cubic centimeters version of that engine, the unit that gave the Austin-Heeley 3000 its name and its character, came in 1959 when the car appeared in the form that would carry it through to the end of production 8 years later. The 3000 was not a new car in any fundamental structural sense. It sat on the same basic chassis that the line had used since 1952, a ladder frame, design with independent front suspension and a live rear axle, and it wore a body whose essential proportions and character had been established in the 100 and refined progressively through the 106. What changed with the 3-litre engine was the nature of the experience at the controls. The C-Series in 2,912 cubic centimetres form in the twin carburettor specification of the early 3000 produced approximately 124 brake horsepower and enough low-end torque to make the car feel genuinely powerful in the way that a long-stroke six-cylinder with that displacement naturally does. The road car marks specifications and what it was like to drive. The Austin-Heeley 3000 ran through 3 distinct marques across its 8-year life, each one refining the formula without altering its fundamental nature. Understanding the differences between them matters both to the historian and to anyone approaching the classic car market today, because the marques are not equivalent, and the gap in desirability between them is reflected clearly in what the auction rooms say. The Mark I ran from 1959 to 1961 and is the purest expression of the original intention. Twin SU carburettors, a 4-speed gearbox with overdrive on the upper ratios, and a body that was still fundamentally a 2-seater. There was a nominal 2+2 option with small occasional rear seats, but the car's proportions were designed around the front occupants, and nothing about the rear accommodation encouraged extended use. The Mark I produced approximately 124 brake horsepower in road trim, which through a car weighing in the region of 2,240 pounds gave performance that period road tests recorded as capable of reaching 60 miles per hour from rest in around 11 seconds and a top speed in the region of 114 miles per hour. Those figures for 1959 placed the Austin-Heeley 3000 in serious company. The Mark II arrived in 1961 with 3 carburettors in place of 2 revisions to the cylinder head that lifted power to approximately 132 brake horsepower and a front grille that altered the car's face just enough to be identifiable to the knowledgeable observer. The triple carburettor specification is the detail that attracts most attention in period and historical discussion, though in practice the difference in road behavior between the Mark I and Mark II was one of degree rather than character. The Mark III, which ran from 1963 to the end of production in 1967, is the car that most people encounter first because it was produced in the greatest numbers and because its specification represented the most complete version of what Heeley and BMC had been refining across the decade. The engine returned to twin carburettors. The triple installation had caused mixture problems that outweighed its advantages, but in revised form producing approximately 150 brake horsepower in the final BJ8 specification. A new folding hood mechanism improved the experience of open-air motoring considerably over the earlier cars. Wind-up windows replaced the earlier side screens, which was the change that moved the car meaningfully closer to the grand touring concept that the market was beginning to demand by the mid-1960s. The Mark III BJ8 is the most refined of the 3 and commands the highest prices today. Accordingly, what all 3 marques shared and what no amount of specification comparison fully captures was the quality of the driving experience at the wheel. The 3000 required engagement in a way that later sports cars with their power steering and their progressive suspension settings deliberately remove. The steering was direct and heavy at parking speeds, lightening progressively as the speed built. The ride on anything other than a smooth road reminded the driver and passenger that the chassis had been designed in the early 1950s for roads that were themselves a different proposition from what came later. And the engine, that long-stroke six-cylinder with its particular delivery, pulling from low revs with a torque curve that rewarded patience rather than aggression, produced a sound that, if you have heard a well-tuned 3000 at full song on an open road, requires no further description. 3 RAC Rally victories and the competition record. The Austin-Heeley 3000's competition record is the part of the car's story that tends to surprise people who know it first as a concours object, and it is the part that I think deserves the most careful treatment, because it is easy to assert a rally record and considerably harder to understand what it actually meant to achieve it. The RAC Rally of Great Britain in the years between 1959 and 1965 was not the forest stage event it became in the 1970s. It was a road event, run partly on closed public roads, partly on forest tracks, with regularity sections, special stages, and tests that combined to produce an event that was demanding in a different way from the pure speed forest rallying that would later define the sport's character. Winning it required a car that was reliable, competitive across a range of surface types, and manageable over the distances and durations that a British winter rally imposed. The Austin-Heeley 3000 in the hands of the works drivers that the BMC competitions department fielded satisfied all three requirements with a consistency that the results table confirms. The BMC competitions department, operating from Abingdon, was by the early 1960s one of the most capable factory competition operations in British motorsport. The team that Stuart Turner managed from 1961 onward brought to the Austin-Heeley program the same disciplined, data-informed approach that it applied to the Mini Cooper, with the difference that where the Mini's advantages were in agility and lightweight, the Heeley's advantages were in raw power and the durability that came from an engine that had never been asked to operate far above its engineering limits. Pat Moss, sister of Sterling, a driver of exceptional natural ability who had served her competition apprenticeship in trials and club events before reaching the works program, drove an Austin-Heeley 3000 to overall victory at the RAC Rally in 1960. She was the first woman to win an international rally outright, and the margin of her victory was not the narrow kind that invites arguments about fortune. It was the kind that makes the argument before anyone can start it. The Austin-Heeley she drove was a competition-prepared works car, naturally, but the preparation remained within the spirit of what the road car was. The engine, the basic structure, the running gear were recognizable relatives of what a private buyer could acquire from a Heeley dealer. Timo Mäkinen, the Finnish driver, who would later become one of the most celebrated figures of the Mini Cooper's competition career, took the RAC Rally victory in a 3000 in 1965. The car was by that point at a competitive disadvantage against some of its opposition in terms of absolute power-to-weight ratio on the tighter stage configurations that the event was increasingly using. The victory was a product of reliability and pace management as much as outright speed, and it reflected well on both the driver and the car's fundamental engineering. Rauno Aaltonen in 1964 completed the third RAC victory, placing the Austin-Heeley 3000 alongside the Ford Escort and the Mini Cooper as one of the three cars most closely associated with British rally success in the classic era. Aaltonen was among the most complete rally drivers of his generation, technically precise, strategically intelligent, and possessed of a smoothness at the controls that preserved machinery while maintaining competitive pace. Beyond the three RAC victories, the 3000 competed at the front of the Alpine Rally, the the Liège-Sofia-Liège, and the Tulip Rally. The Liège in particular, a brutal long-distance event through Yugoslavia and the Alps that tested mechanical durability as severely as any event outside the Saharan rallies, was exactly the territory where the Healey's combination of power and reliability made it competitive against machinery that on paper should have been out of reach. The end of production, legacy, and what they are worth today. The Austin-Heeley 3000 went out of production in December of 1967, and the circumstances of its departure are the detail I mentioned at the beginning, the one that casts the whole story in a particular light. The car was not discontinued because it had stopped selling. It had not. In its final BJ8 specification, the 3000 remained a car with genuine demand in the export markets that were commercially essential to its survival, particularly in the United States, which had accounted for a substantial proportion of total production throughout the model's life. The problem was not the market. The problem was the market's government. American safety and emissions regulations, tightening through the mid-1960s with a speed that the British motor industry had not fully anticipated, were making the 3000's open structure and its emissions profile incompatible with continued American sale. The cost of engineering changes required to meet the regulatory trajectory, not just the rules in force in 1967, but where those rules were clearly heading, was not something BMC could absorb for a model at the 3000's volume. The decision was made to discontinue rather than invest in compliance that would quickly become obsolete. Donald Healey did not accept the decision quietly. The correspondence between him and BMC in the period leading to the announcement reflects a frustration that anyone who understood what the car was would recognize as legitimate. The 3000 was not an old design chasing a market that had moved on. It was a competitive, desirable, characterful car ended by regulatory economics rather than by natural attrition. Total production of the Austin-Heeley 3000 across all three marques from 1959 to 1967 was approximately 17,300 examples, a figure that appears consistently across the principal sources. In the classic car market, the BJ8, Mark III commands the highest prices, with concours quality examples in British Racing Green, Colorado Red, or Healey Blue, regularly achieving strong results at R.M. Sotheby's, Bonham's, and Gooding and Company. Works documented competition cars with verifiable rally histories represent a different category of rarity entirely and are among the most carefully contested lots on the British and American classic auction calendar. The structural and mechanical caution that applies to any serious 3000 purchase is worth stating plainly. The bodywork was assembled using construction techniques standard for the period, over a separate chassis with steel body panels on an aluminium-intensive structure, and the corrosion patterns that result from decades of exposure to British and American weather have their own specific logic. The chassis outriggers, the sill structure, and the inner sills in particular require careful inspection by someone who knows where the problems accumulate. A sound car that has been properly maintained or correctly restored is a genuinely rewarding thing to own and to use. A car that has been cosmetically presented over structural problems is a significantly different proposition, and the gap between the two at the prices that good thousands now command makes the cost of a pre-purchase inspection the most sensible expenditure in the acquisition process. The Austin-Heeley 3000 was discontinued in December of 1967 because the country that bought most of them decided, through its legislators, that the world the car had been built for was no longer the world on offer. The regulations were not wrong in any general sense. The direction of travel on safety and emissions represented a genuine public interest. But something specific was lost in December of '67, a combination of qualities that the car embodied and that the industry was not going to reassemble in quite the same configuration. What those qualities were is easier to feel in the car than to describe on paper. The directness of the controls, the sound of the engine at pace, the specific sensation of sitting low in an open car on a good road with enough power to make the driver's decisions meaningful. These are things that enthusiast literature has tried to put into words for 60 years, and the attempts are all adequate and none of them are quite right, because the experience is physical and the words are not. What can be said with confidence is this: the Austin-Heeley 3000 was a car of genuine dual character, and in both of its characters it was among the best that Britain produced in its era. As a road car, it offered an experience that connected the driver to the act of driving in a way that the increasing sophistication of later sports cars progressively insulated against. As a competition car, it won 3 times at the highest domestic level, finished at the front of events that broke lesser machinery, and did so in configurations that remained recognizably related to the cars that private buyers were driving on the roads of Britain and America in the same years. That combination, the road car that was also genuinely that fast, in the hands of the right driver, on the right stage, is what the Austin-Heeley 3000 means. It is enough. Now I want to hear from you. Did you own a 3000, or did someone in your family? Did you see one at a rally in the early 1960s, or at a race meeting, or simply on a road in the way that these cars used to appear unexpectedly in the ordinary traffic of a Tuesday afternoon? Was it the sound that stayed with you, or the shape, or something else entirely? Leave it in the comments. The people watching this video carry memories of these cars that the marque histories do not record, and I would genuinely rather read what you remember than review another auction catalogue. If this was worth your time, a like and a subscription are appreciated. These scripts take longer to write than the running time suggests, and an audience that takes this history seriously is what makes that work worth doing. Thank you for watching.